I'm excited to do an interview with you. This is real estate investing live. I want you for sure, everybody that's in this room right now, go check out our YouTube channel. Go check out what we're up to, because we interview the very, very best real estate investors all throughout the country. And Bryce is there. He is amongst that group. And Bryce, I met you through Clubhouse many, many months back.
It's crazy because you meet so many people and you try to do this networking thing. I'm always amazed. So those of you that are great networkers and connectors, I just applaud you, because one thing that I know best is working a room, selling, and I believe that selling is a service. And I can make friends with just about anybody, but I'm not a great friend. I'll just put it out there. I'm like, I'm not great at looking back over my shoulder. Colton is in the room. He's a good friend of mine, and he can tell you, like, that dude, he didn't call people back. I still love you guys. Like, I still love you, Brian. I still love my friends. But I am just not the greatest person at looking back, because I run 1,000,000 miles a minute. And that's why we connect, guys like you and I at a high level. That's why guys like Colton and Dave, that are on the stage here with us in the clubhouse room, that's how we connect, because we run 1,000,000 miles a minute. And they're like, hey, you guys want to come? And oh, you're going that way? Well, I'll see you at the other side, So it's really great to connect with you, man, for sure.
And that's what makes a great entrepreneur, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the essence of entrepreneurship. But man, Bryce, let's just kind of start out. I've heard your story before, but for my audience, we're going to publish this to YouTube. We're going to publish this to our podcast as well. My audience probably doesn't know you. You haven't really been out in the public eye. Even though you've been doing real estate for a while, I remember your story. You haven't really been out in the public eye for very long. Just give it maybe a 60-second synopsis of your story. How did you get to the point to where you are today?
Gosh, Brian, 60 seconds is going to be tough, but I'll do my best.
Because I want to get to the meat, Bryce. I want to get people tuned in because they want the meat. They don't need the backstory. Just give us a quick 60-second backstory.
Yeah. Prior to getting into real estate 10 years ago, I was a Fortune 500 business consultant, contracted with Ford, Nissan, Toyota, Honda, Tyco, Owens Corning's, the Pentagon, doing some hostage negotiations with some very high-level CIA and operatives, right, within the government. And I did really well for myself. I haven't always done well. I grew up in a very cult-like religion, and when my parents separated at a young age, my mom moved into the inner city projects of Chicago, and I started gangbanging and dope dealing and just doing all the bad stuff, right? Like doing all the bad stuff. And for me, I had a life-changing incident. I was 17. I was facing 2 counts of murder, drug trafficking, conspiracy, and a whole bunch of other litany list of charges. And by an act of God and the grace of God, I had a miraculous miracle happen. All of those cases were dismissed on some technicalities. And my uncle grabbed me by the ear, took me to Davenport, Iowa, and said, you're going to be detailing cars and living on my couch in my basement if you don't get your stuff together. Fast forward a year, I had begged and begged and begged for an opportunity. My uncle said, on one cold, snowy December afternoon, Brian, he's like, if you can sell a car today, I'll put you on the sales team next week. I went to work. I sold 3 cars that day. I sold 2 trucks and an SUV on this Ford dealership's lot in the middle of a blizzard. And the next week he put me on the lot, right? I was selling cars, and I fell in love with the automotive industry. And over the next 2 years, I would become the #1 car salesman in the world, recruited out of my dealership by Ford, and then later Nissan, Toyota, and Honda, traveling the world, teaching my very simple 5 steps to the conversation. Because that's what selling is, right? Selling is having a conversation, solving a problem, and serving the client that's in front of you to the best of your ability. You're the trusted authority. You're the source of all the information that they need, want, or could have to make an educated decision. And I figured out a very simple 5-step process to do that. And it made me tens of millions of dollars. Unfortunately, Brian, in 2006, my wife and I at the time had a son that was killed. And she ended up losing her marbles, just completely in the bottle. Friday, June 13, 2008 was kind of the pinnacle point in my life where I got a phone call and she had taken her life. And in that moment, business and work just wasn't important to me anymore. But up until that point, that's all I had. All I had was this name and reputation I built in the automotive industry and in the corporate world. And what everybody else didn't know, and for your audience, like some of you may be going through some struggles, some of you are maybe hitting these plateaus. I want to encourage you, there's light at the end of the tunnel. When there's a shadow in your life, there's light casting that shadow from somewhere. So push through, pull through, do whatever it has to take, because there's always another explanation. And I'll never forget, I got a phone call March of 2010, this girl that I had been messing around with, and I had been drinking and heavily into drugs at the time, literally snorted and drank close to $80 million in 2 years. In less than 2 years, I was just out there, lost all my corporate contracts, didn't care about the world. And I got a call from this girl, and we had a baby on the way. And in that moment, I'm like, okay, well, I've got something I need to do. I sobered up, and in November, he was born. Hashtag the middle school millionaire. I've got a 10-year-old boy now, and he's just a stud. He'll be 11 this year. He's done over $30 million in his own personal business, and I've been super blessed, Brian. But that's not, my story in real estate is just getting started, right? Like we had this baby, and I come home one day. I started getting my life back together. We had this baby. And I come home one day early from work. I had been flying around. I was in Florida, California, Arizona, and I came back to Texas where I'm at now. And I come home early on a Friday afternoon, and here's my baby boy, a couple months old. It's the middle of January. He's on the floor rolling around, goo goo, gaga. And she's passed out in the bed. She had an OD. There's pills everywhere. And I'm just like, why? Why now? And I'll never forget, what does every good gangster or entrepreneur do? CYA, right? I picked my boy up, I put him back in the mess, took a bunch of pictures, went and stayed at a hotel that weekend. And Monday morning, I would start the battle of my life, fighting for custody of my boy. And over the next 12 to 18 months, not only did I get custody of my boy, I lost all those contracts that I had worked so hard to get back. I was now homeless, sleeping in my car, couch surfing from hotel to hotel when I could. And it's 10 years, actually, 1 month from today, September 20, actually it's 28. So just over a month, September 28, 2011. I'll never forget. I had just had enough. And in that moment, I wrote a letter to my son. I wrote a letter to my mom, and I pulled my car out into the middle of the road in the middle of this busy intersection in McKinney, Texas. And I pulled the trigger. The same 40 cal that sits next to my bed tonight. It's never jammed since, never jammed before. But that night, Brian, it jammed 3 times in my mouth. And in that moment, that's when I knew that I had something greater than me. I had something greater inside of me that had a purpose, and I didn't know what it was. But I've been super blessed. Over the last 9.5 years, I've built a $100 million real estate company, walked away from it, and done it all over again in the last 3 years, and 10x that completely. I've spoke on some of the craziest stages with Tony Robbins and Les Brown, Dr. Eric Thomas, just to name a few, teaching my 7 steps to the real estate transaction and 5 steps to every conversation. So with that said, that's my story. I know it's more than 60 seconds. But it's been a journey, man. It's been a journey, and it's been fun. It's been really fun. I've learned a lot of lessons.
Bryce, obviously I knew some of your story, but that getting the full breadth of it is, it takes, I think it probably takes us all back a little bit. And there's a little bit that I think everybody can take away from your story that's relatable. And there's so many different directions, obviously, that we can go. I definitely want to bring up and talk about the 5 steps to the conversation. Talk about the 7 steps to, would you say every real estate deal,
every transaction, yeah,
every transaction. I want to talk about that stuff for sure and give people like real estate value. But there's a lot of other value here too, obviously. And there's a couple of specific questions I'd love to follow up with you. And feel free to share what you'd like to share. Feel free to answer this however you'd like, but a couple of things really stood out to me there. First of all, adversity, just that word, how much adversity in every different way, it seems like, hit your life Do we need adversity, Bryce, to be able to flourish and to be able to be successful? Is adversity necessary?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been a master practitioner in NLP for over 20 years, Brian. And one of the modalities or principles in neurolinguistic programming is the map is not the territory. And so to say we need adversity to grow would be one thing. But to say that we need adversity to be successful is completely different, right? So for example, if I gave you a map to my house, you could easily find my house. You could follow the GPS. However, you would never know the hills, valleys, and 6-story overpasses here in Dallas-Fort Worth that you're going to have to drive through and over and around to get to my house. So the map is not the territory. What may be adversity to some is like a pea compared to the mountain in someone else's life, right? So to have adversity for success, some people just don't see that. They work hard, they get great results. Other people that are stubborn, hard-headed, and have this crazy vision and mission like I do on my life, like sometimes we have to go through that fire. And that's why I wear the hat that I wear, right? Like it's backwards. If you're looking at this on YouTube, it's really backwards. And it says sharpen, right? And I believe, like the Bible says, iron sharpens iron. We're better together. But sometimes those adversities are the fire that helps anneal and sculpt that metal to make it sharper. And so some may say, yes, we need it. Some may say, no, we don't, right? At the end of the day, it's just all a matter of perspective. For me, I needed it because I was selfish. I was ego-driven. I was greedy. And I had to have kind of that life kick you in the, you know what, to get my act together. Some just don't need that, though.
Well, I don't know of them. I don't know many people like that, because people in my life that I've experienced do need some sort of adversity for them. You're right. Adversity is different to everybody, but the people I see who are super successful, they needed something to happen in their life. You mentioned being stubborn, being hard-headed, and you needed that kind of kick in the pants. How do you motivate people today? You mentioned you're a master at NLP. You've done all that. You understand people. The 5 steps to any conversation. You may be a bad friend, as you said it earlier, but you know how to talk to people, and you know how to motivate people, get people to take action. How do you do that?
That's a great question, Brian. I think the best answer to that is by having better conversations, by asking better questions, right? You can't get anybody to do anything that they don't want to already do. It's just a matter of where are their hiccups, hurts, hangups, hesitations. And when you can find those, then you can provide questions that allow them to come to a conclusion or a solution, right? But they're going to really have to want it for themselves. And so, a lot of like motivational speakers are like, you got to find your why. And I just don't believe that. I believe that you have to help someone find their how. And when you find their how, their why becomes more important than the obstacle between them. Does that make sense?
Rephrase that. Say that a different way.
Sure. I love that you say that. So if your why is out here, and I've got my hand clenched in a fist, right? If your why is out here and this is why you're doing it, well, you're going to have to start on the first rung. And so you're going to have to let go of that for a minute so that you can go from rung to rung to get the needle moving. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the why that's important. It's the how. How am I going to provide for these kids? How am I going to leave the legacy? And if you can find that, then you have no excuses, right? It's like the old, why worry? Can you fix it? Yes. Good. You're good. Fix it. Don't worry about it. Can you not fix it? No. Can you fix it? No. Then why worry? And so if you can find the how, then you can move that needle. And that's what I like to stress. And you can do that by asking better questions.
How did you figure that out? Where did you hear that from? Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Brian, I had a mentor when Ford recruited me out of my dealership at the age of 19. They're like, before we write you a contract, we need some mentoring. We need to reel you in. You're a 19-year-old kid. I had, tattoos on my face at the time. And we're like, we need to dial you back. We see your numbers. You can do something, but you're a little rough around the edges. And I'll never forget my mentor, my very first mentor that I ever hired, was hired for me by Ford Motor Company. And it was a man named Bill Bowden. The guy was 65, 70 years old with the energy of a 15-year-old. He was running around dealerships and he was throwing stuff. But he was just a seasoned sales professional with a lot of wisdom. And I learned that by him dissecting that process. And so when we start talking about that process, he's like, every time you do this, you do this. And it's called RAC: repeat, assign a feeling or emotion, ask a question. And so we labeled this RAC as part of our process, and we'll get to that here in just a bit. But we labeled that process. And when you have a label on something, you can identify it. And when you have it identified, that process just becomes a habit, right? If you just trust the process, it becomes a habit. And that's really where that came from. It wasn't any one aha moment. It was just, I created a process by extracting what had given me results.
Yeah. And I asked that question because I've never heard anyone say that before. I've never heard anyone say, you got to find the how. And the how kind of like leads to, it's not that it leads to the why. What's a different way of saying that? It makes the why become real.
Yeah, it becomes reality. When you've got this why, like, I'm driven because my kids need a better life. Well, how?
That's not tangible. That's not a tangible like thing to grab a hold of. But the how is, because the how is I'm going to go take action. It's actionable. I'm going to do this, then do this, and do this. And the why kind of takes care of itself.
And you can take that even to the next level, Brian. Like, it's not about doing, it's about being, right? You want to be a millionaire. You want to be a real estate investor. Wake up and be that person. Wake up at 4:45, like those of us that are getting up early. Do your meditation, do your affirmations, do the things, but you're being the person that does those actions. And when you start being, you become the doer.
But the pushback to that, Bryce, is I don't have a why. I don't have a reason big enough to get me out of bed. Right? That's what I've been taught. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, so why are you here? Right?
Bryce, that's one of the hard, but you say that a little bit tongue in cheek, it seems like, but that's a legit question that people do not know how to answer.
Yeah, and I'll be the first one to admit, I battled this for years. Why am I here? If I don't have a reason, why am I here? And you have to look around yourself and get out of your own way and realize, we live life one of two ways, Brian. We're either living life intentionally or we're living life reactionary. And 99% of the human race lives reactionary and becomes that person that's like, well, why am I here? And that's why suicide rates are up. However, if we look at life like, oh, wow, I have a reason. Don't know what it is, but I'm breathing today. Oh, thank God, or whatever you believe in. I believe in Jesus. He's kind of gangster. I call him bro. I'm not your typical religious person, but I wake up and I'm like, I'm breathing. There's some reason. Let's figure it out. How am I going to do that?
You went through that fire. You went through that adversity where you just said it earlier. You pulled the trigger 3 times and the gun was jammed.
Yeah.
But it was, in your mind, you had checked out.
Yeah.
But you're here for a reason.
And I think that we all are, whether it's the ones that do end up, God forbid, taking their life, that lesson, the adversity that it creates for others, we don't know. We will never know until we get to the other side, right? And who knows if we find out then. Yeah. But that adversity that it's created from that and the impact around, and knowing that you are in control, you have full control over your actions and your reactions. So why react when you can act? And when you start to act intentionally, it becomes clearer and clearer with each and every step as to the purpose that you have.
You said something interesting when you were sharing your story about you got it all, you gained it all, and then you kind of walked away, and then here in the past few years you came back to it and
Yeah.
rebuilt again. Is real estate, it can be an escape for people. Is it an escape for you?
I don't know that I don't call it an escape. For me, it's a tool. It's a widget, right?
A tool to achieve what? To get to what?
Yeah, to serve my mission. And my mission is to share my faith and my belief in the miracles like Lazarus out of the grave, like Jesus off the cross, out of the tomb, miracles that I've witnessed. Like my son has done $30+ million in his 10 years of life. He was never supposed to speak. He was never supposed to talk. He speaks on stages in front of tens of thousands of student athletes once or twice a year. He's got a Twitch and a YouTube channel with millions of followers that pay him every single week for the stuff that comes out of his mouth that he reads every day, right? So my mission is to share the miracles, to show the light that is casting the shadow on somebody else's life. And if I can do that and change one life and know that I had an impact, I feel fulfilled. And I get an opportunity to do that daily.
Why'd you walk away and what made you come back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was actually in a trifecta partnership, and we were doing, 50, 60, 70 transactions a month. It was me and one or two, depending on how many stayed, right? We didn't have a great retention on the acquisition side, but we had a process down. And one of our partners got married. We're still friends today. I talk to him occasionally, but one of our partners got married and just kind of checked out of the business. The other one moved to Mexico to manage and live in some property because he was living his best life, right? And here I am, like, co-leading this organization with a bunch of virtual assistants. And I just felt like there was a disconnect. And I went to a networking event, and I'm not big on networking, Brian. I already kind of shared that with you. I'm not a great friend. I joke about that, but it's because I go to these events and I don't like going to them because it's just like, oh, who's got the biggest, pocketbook, or, I joke, the biggest stick in the room. That's STICK, folks. And I just don't like it. I don't care about that, right? And so I went to my very first networking event after being in the business 7.5 years. And I'm talking with some people, and one of these persons, a lot of people would know him. He's like, so what is it that you do, man? I'm like, nobody's asked me that all night. I wholesale real estate. Oh, wow, that's exciting. Like, what do you do? How many deals you guys close this year? I'm like, I think this year we'll close around 11 or 1,200. I'm not sure that number. He's like, what? And I didn't know that. I didn't know that what we were doing as such a small organization was such a big deal. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because I never networked. I never went to these events. I didn't even know they existed until this, 7.5, 8 years ago now. And so he's telling me, he's like, dude, everybody needs to know what you do. And so he invited me back to his event, and I was speaking on stage with him and Kent Clothier and some of the other baddest dudes in real estate, just telling my story. And then I got invited to go to Jamaica in front of like 10,000 real estate investors. And then I got a phone call from the agent of one of the other speakers that was the agent to Tony Robbins. And I got hired to come and speak at their mastermind. And then Dr. Eric Thomas. And it just had this trickle effect. But I'm over here in this small partnership. And I'm like, everybody needs to know, like, we got something cool. And they're like, no, we didn't want that. They wanted to stay small, under the radar, and local to Dallas. And I'm like, everybody needs to know what we do. If I can share this with 100 people that share it with 100 people that share it with 100 people, we're actually making an impact. We're not just changing the one homeowner's life here and here. We're getting thousands of people that are changing hundreds of thousands of lives by saving them out of tough situations. And so it was October of 2018. I had just gotten married. My wife and I just bought our forever home. And it's not fancy. Like, we moved from University Park. Like, Mark Cuban was my neighbor. We moved from that neighborhood to a $500,000 home neighborhood, downsized tremendously, and we're loving it. Little did I know, this is part of my story, actually, Brian. Little did I know that this wholesale transaction that I ended up taking down and living in, when I look out my office window right in front of me from my 6 bedroom that I don't even need, right? I look out my office window and I can see the water tower that I used to sleep under the night that I pulled the trigger. I came to this house 3 or 4 times, right? Going through this transaction, inspections and surveys and re-inspections, making sure that people moved out. And here I am living in the house, looking at the water tower every single day from where I came from. Wow. But that's not where my story ends. And we're in the middle of it right now, right? But I walked away from this organization because they wanted to just continue to be transactional, and I wanted to be impactful. I don't think I've ever said that. That was fire. That was fire. But that's really what it was. And so when I walked away, it wasn't a year later that they had already kind of dissolved and fallen apart, and it was probably the best thing that I did, because now you fast forward 3.5 years, or 3 years, it'll be 3 years in October. You fast forward 3 years, and I've done everything that we did over there in 7.5 years, times 10, and built 4 other companies that are all doing in excess of 7 and 8 figures. And super blessed, man. Super blessed.
You said that, and I promise, for everyone who's listening to this right now, I promise we're going to get to. I want to get to the good stuff. Do you have a hard stop that I need to be aware of, Bryce?
I really don't. No.
Okay, just want to make sure we got time to get to that.
I do in 30 minutes. Yes,
30 minutes. I do too. I got 30 minutes left. So you said something that I think is super interesting that affects everybody. And it's something really I didn't even discover until pretty recently. You said, you're in the middle of it. You said that that's not where the story ends, is what you said. There's no, and this is what I'm really just kind of it's not that I've heard it for the first time. I'm living it for the first time. Life, there is no destination. There's no destination. I used to be so destination oriented that I want to get to the top of that mountain. And Zig Ziglar said this: once you get to the top of the mountain, guess what happens? You can see further.
Yeah.
You can always see further, no matter how high you go and how far you go. Once you get there, you can always see further. And the point here is there is no destination. The end of the line, the end of the journey is the day you die. And that's arguable, obviously. But the end of the line here on earth, at least, is the day you die. The whole thing is a journey.
Yeah.
You just got done saying that, that's not where the story ends. And I think that's super interesting. I just don't want to gloss over that.
No, I appreciate you pointing that out. You're absolutely right. You said it's arguable, but I agree with you. It's like once you get to the top of the mountain, what most people don't think about is when they get to the top of the mountain and they can see further, you got to climb back down and get in the valley to get to the other mountaintop.
Yes.
And you better surround yourself with a team. You better surround yourself with folks like my guy Colton and Dave and BT and Brian, yourself, right? There's not a lot of people in this room. Mark, I see Mark's in here. Mark, what's up, man? But at the end of the day, you've got to surround yourself with people that have either already jumped to that next mountaintop or are on that same journey. And when you do that, it makes life a whole heck of a lot easier. And when you do climb down to go to that other mountaintop, that valley, you've got that support system. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, the support system is key too. And also for climbing the mountain too, because a lot of times people, you hear it said it's lonely at the top. Well, it doesn't have to be. That's a choice. I want to, by the way, let me just say this for my audience. REI Live, we're going to publish this to YouTube. This is going to go out to the podcast, the audio only audience as well. But we're actually in this moment with Bryce. Bryce is live inside of his Clubhouse feed, and there's some other folks in there. I want to open this up for them to possibly ask you questions as well. But before I do that, I do, because for the sake of time, I want to make sure we get to it. I do want to ask you, you as much as you've kind of said you're not a networker, Like I've built my entire business on networking, on the backbone of networking. And I'm very interested to hear your perspective, especially when you start talking about the 5 steps to every conversation, because that is networking. That's sales too. The whole thing is interwoven. So I want to hear this, Bryce, the 5 steps to every conversation. And can you just give them to me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll go back and talk about them individually?
Yeah, for sure. So step number 1 is warm with form. FORM. Okay. Warm with form. Step number 2 is bridge the gap.
Okay.
Step number 3 is ask defeating questions.
Okay.
Step number 4 is the objective, close the deal, get the contract, set the appointment. It's the objective, right?
Got it.
And then step number 5 is warm down with form.
Okay, so I want to talk about, I don't know what form is. So number 1 is warm with form. What does that mean?
So let me tell a story real quick, Brian, for those that are just listening on the audio, both here on Clubhouse and in your podcast. Think of it like this. If you go to the gym, the first thing that you do is to warm up, right? Like you stretch out, you get the blood flowing, all that stuff, right? Well, if you don't do it with proper form, what's going to happen? You're going to hurt yourself. Yeah. So you got to do it right, and you got to do it right from the beginning. And then once you've warmed up and stretched out, you don't just walk over to the bench and start bench pressing 300 pounds, right? Like, unless you're my buddy Colton on here, like you don't just go and start bench pressing 300 pounds. Colton, give me a flash of your mic for that, brother. But here's the deal. Like, you go and you put 50, you put 100, you put 150, 175, 200, 225. You start to bridge the gap. That's step number 2.
Well,
right?
let me ask you real quick about step number 1 still. Warm with form. It sounds to me, the way you were explaining it sounds to me like
I'm gonna get back to the acronym. I want to share this story so that everybody can loop it together, because when they hear this story, it'll make sense in the conversation.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Right? So at the gym, you bridge the gap. You don't just go over and start maxing out. But then what happens when you're on rep 7, rep 8, rep 9? You start to create these limiting beliefs, the chemical imbalance. It says that you're weaker. And what happens? So that's step number 3, right? Creating limiting beliefs or asking defeating questions, right? What happens? Boom. Step number 4, you close the set. The objective, you're done. And you don't just get up and walk out unless you're Bryce, Coach Sharp, and McKinley and get an ice cream. You warm down. Right? You warm down with proper form, so that way you cool off and you stretch out, and then you go. It's no different in the conversation, Brian. In the conversation, you warm with form. Well, form is an acronym that stands for family, occupation, recreation, motivation. And if you can't see me, I've got 2 hands up. I got FOR on my left hand and M on my right hand, because you'll never solve someone's motivation. You'll never solve their money issues if you don't know what they're for. And so you need to talk to them about their family. 3 to 5 questions. Gosh, Brian, I see you've got some toys back there. Are those your toys, or are those the kids' toys that maybe they thought was cool to bring in the office and you set it up on the shelf? Da-da-da-da-da. Oh, my boy gave me that. Nice. How old's your boy? And now we're having conversation. We're creating relations, right? And then, occupation. Gosh, Brian, you're doing a podcast. Is this all that you do? And do you work from home? Nice. How long have you been doing that? And you start talking about occupation. And then you talk about recreation. You've got a lot of stuff going on, brother. Like, what do you do to get your mind off of things? I noticed in your profile picture this, and this. Like, what is it that you do to check out of reality and just spend some you time? Oh, wow, you fish? What kind of fishing do you do? 3 to 5 questions about their family, occupation, recreation. You'll find the how to solve their motivation. So then you're in step 2, right? In step 2, you bridge the gap. Well, you don't just want to go in and start, all right, you got a $200,000 house that looks like it needs, $100,000 in rehab, so I'm going to give you $25,000. No. You've got to bridge the gap. And we've all heard the term keeping up with the Joneses, right? Flash your mic if you're in the audience, or raise your hand if you've got a question. We're going to bring you up for questions here in a little bit. But you've all heard the term keeping up with the Joneses. Well, people want to feel like other people that have been successful or have had similar challenges just like them. So we bridge the gap. We bring them over to the other side of the conversation by leading them with the right questions. And so, for example, my question that I always go to is like, gosh, Brian, people I normally talk to, they want to know what we do and how we do it. But more importantly, like, how much can we offer for their house? Do you have those same types of questions? And just like you're nodding your head, yes, right? Inevitably, yes, I want to know how much. And besides that, tell me, why do you really want to sell this house today? Well, now they feel like somebody that's had the success by selling their house to me, and they're inevitably in the same situation in their head. Now we can get into the meat and potatoes. And that's when we start digging in step 3 and asking defeating questions. So it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So, for example, a lot of us investors walk into a house or talking to them on the phone before we go out and see the place. And a lot of us are like, oh, man, this roof definitely needs replaced. Well, you just told somebody's home, you just told somebody, a homeowner, that their roof is crap. But what if you ask the same question like this? Like, gosh, I noticed some of the trees and branches on the roof. When was the last time you've had that looked at? Oh, you haven't. How come? Right? Now you start to unbury these things that they already know that they're trying to hide from you, but because they know, like, and trust you, they're like, oh man, my wife died. I've been busy. Oh my God. You know what I mean? And then in step 4, once you've gotten all the answers to the questions, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the kitchen, the floors, the paint, the carpet, the roof, the landscape, the garage, once you've had 3 to 5 questions on all these things, now the only thing to do is close the deal. Close the deal, solve the problem, provide the solution, because they know, like, and trust you, and your best friends now. They're not going to sell to anybody else because nobody else had this conversation. Man, this is easy. Brian, you know what we're going to do? We're going to come in, we're going to knock out this wall and do all this stuff. But first, we have to make sure that title's clear. So I'm curious, if I gave you cash today, what's the absolute lowest amount you take for the property? And they give you this, and then you rack them, which I'm going to get to that in a second. Remember the rack? You rack the bar at the set. Rack is the acronym RAQ. Oh, wow, 100,000. That's a lot of money. Where did you come up with that number? Right? And then you ask them again, okay, that makes sense. Hey, what's the lowest you would really take? Now that you understand that 100,000 is what the Zestimate says, and that's not accurate, and you understand how that works now, like, well, I got to get 75. I owe 60. If I can put 15, that makes sense. So if I can give you 75, you'd make sure you close this thing with me today. Fantastic. That's easy. What's an email? And I'll send you over a contract. Let's get this rolling. In the meantime, step 5, how are you going to go celebrate today? You can go out for steak dinner or hang out with the boy. That's amazing. What are you guys going to do? We warm down with form. And that 5-step process has made me millions of dollars over the last 20 plus years in business. And it hasn't changed. Real estate is just the widget.
For sure. No, I totally get that and agree with you there. Bryce, what would you say to in the market that we're in? Some people are saying it's harder today than it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago. It's harder today. Prices are higher than they've ever been. The seller is more educated or has more resources at their fingertip. There's more people doing it than ever before. Has anything changed for you?
Not at all. If anything, we've gotten busier. And the reason for that is because we're having a better conversation. We're actually solving problems and we're educating in the process. People are still dying. People are still going through divorce. People are still losing their jobs. They're getting behind on their mortgages. They're falling into debt. People are winning properties or airing properties that they could never even dream of affording because they've already got their own little bubble that trying to keep up with the Joneses. This property over here is going to break that, and they're getting uncomfortable. People are tired of being landlords with people that want to live off the system right. And so there's plenty of opportunities. It's just a matter of how to market to them. And so, we teach that in our academy of like how to generate 5 to 10 hot motivated sellers every single week for free.
Yeah.
And so that's easy for me just because I have a different mindset, right? It's like, I don't believe in a mindset. I believe in a mind shift. You have to always be growing and thinking and adapting. And so having that mind shift to know, okay, here's an opportunity. How do we help solve their problem? And when we do that, we all go home happier, wealthier, and live in our best lives. So.
Love it. And last question that I have, and we can open it up to other Clubhouse folks.
No, you're good, man.
You breeze through this, and I let it go. It's the very first thing I wrote down when you were telling your story, and I want to come back to it because it kind of ties everything together a little bit. You said in the very beginning that hostage negotiations, CIA. Obviously, I think of it's now famous book from Chris Voss. Never Split the Difference. I interviewed him, by the way, 2 months after that book came out when no one knew who he was. So super incredible dude. How much of that experience shaped what you just kind of explained, shaped kind of the sales part of what you're great at?
Yeah. I think that if I were to put like a percentage on it, it would have to be like 20 to 30%. Because the remaining like 70 to 80% has really been a God-given talent that I've just had to hone in and master. And so I believe that like when you're in the room with masters, you sit at their feet and study, right? Like there's the story of the two ladies and Jesus came to their house, right? One's busy over here doing all this stuff, trying to feel good. And the other one's like sitting at the master's feet, right? And I believe that. I believe that I'm a master. And so I had to study myself first and then look at what others are doing. Oh, I do that. I do it this way. And mastering me first, right? They say on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on before you help someone else. So how in the heck are we going to help somebody if we can't even master ourselves? And so sure, there was a big chunk of that. And I've had the pleasure of working with Chris on a few of the projects, matter of fact, he talks about getting people to say that's right versus you're right,
Yes.
We exchanged that. That was something that Bill Bowden taught me when I was 19. And so how he so eloquently put that in his book, it was beautiful to see. Like I had a little small part in that, and he shared many things with me because he's a little older and more, he's got more wisdom under his belt.
So hold on now, and now you just opened up a whole new can, and I'm trying to limit this to one question. You said it's a God-given talent, and that begs the question that like it sounds to me like you're actually saying that there are going to be some people out there that don't have that God-given talent and they can work really hard and they can probably do okay, but they're never, ever, ever going to be a master.
That's fair to say. That's fair to say. However, I would argue that if they trust the process and follow the masters, they will be better than what their expected potential is, right? And so what I mean by that is like, I've taught my wife, for example, who has gotten multiple degrees, super analytical, she's falling in love with sales and marketing. She's not a salesperson.
Because it's a process for her.
Yes. And that's what I love about what I've done, because I have to be like really structured, because otherwise I'll fly off, right? I've got a lot of tethers in my corner between my wife and my assistant and my other assistant and my business partner, because otherwise I'll float off into the atmosphere. But by having these tethers in place, these processes in place, I've found that it actually takes me even further. And so for somebody that maybe is not a salesperson, they can follow this process. I mean, I think of Dave, who's in the Clubhouse room here listening. He is not the typical salesperson, but he's taken this 5-step process and being a part of our coaching program for the last year. Like he's done more business. He's had a mind shift and had better conversations, and his family and his friends, and like his whole life has been changed because now he has a process. Oh, I can put this in this box and I can do it this way and go further faster.
Got it.
Yeah.
How can my audience reach out to you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm easily accessible. I don't really respond anymore, but I still see messages on Facebook and Instagram. So my name's Bryce McKinley, Bryce McKinley, McKinley, just like the mountain or the president. They joke I'm a national monument around here, yeah, I mean, Facebook, Instagram, those are probably the two quickest ways to get a hold of me. If I don't answer, my assistant will and put us together. And then, reiresultsacademy.com is our platform. We're actually building a social media environment right now. You can register for free. It looks and feels and smells like Facebook platform where there's interaction, deal swaps, things like that. It's not like super live yet. Like we're not marketing it, but it's live. So you can go and register your account there now, set up your social profile. It's going to be a lead gen opportunity for people. It's going to be a networking opportunity. Awesome. It's like Bigger Pockets, Zillow, and Realtor.com all like smashed into one. It's pretty really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, Bryce, I'll link that up in our description for the YouTube channel, our show notes and things like that. I can't thank you enough. First of all, for sharing your story. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with our audience and for giving us some really great information on how to get out there and take action, especially when it comes to a sales process. So, man, really do appreciate you jumping on the call today.